Good morning and welcome to the Fundamentals of English Language and Literature Teaching, which is paper number 10 of semester 3 and MA English part 2. We are dealing with the approaches and methods of language teaching, which is unit number 3 of your syllabus. Today we shall be talking about the communicative approach. Of the various approaches to language teaching, we discuss the structural approach and the lexical approach. We also have the communicative approach and the humanistic approaches. Let us in this video talk about the communicative approach. If we look at the earlier two approaches, we can see that they are based on the theory of nature of language and the theory of language learning. The structural approach believes that structures are the basic elements of language and language learning is mastering the graded structures. While lexical approach believes that lexicons are primary units of language and mastering them is the best way to learn the language. The communicative approach to the language teaching gives importance to the functions of the language rather than the nature of language and theory of language learning. As language is meant for communication, it was felt that the theory of language teaching should basically consider functional aspects. The approach based on this principle of language teaching is regarded as the communicative approach. The communicative movement began in the late 60s of the 20th century. Situational language teaching was used as the most popular method by that time. The foundation partly lies in the linguistic theories that are proposed by the famous American linguist Noam Chomsky. He characterized structural theories saying that they are not able to account for the fundamental characteristics of language, that is, creativity and uniqueness. Linguists also thought that the functional aspect of linguistic theory should be given importance. Communicative approach rests on the theories of functional linguists like John Firth and M.A.K. Halliday, and American sociolinguists Del Hymes, John Gumpers, and William LeBove. The chief proponents of communicative approach are Christopher Cadlan and Henry Widdowson. The theory of communicative approach believes in the functional aspect of the language. The primary function of the language is to communicate. If language is regarded as the means of communication, the theory of language should be communication oriented, and hence the theory rests on the grounds of communication. It has the following theoretical propositions. Number one, language is used for communication, and communication should form the basis of language theories. Number two, activities that involve communication promote learning. Number three, language learning process is strengthened if the useful language is taught to the students. Number four, learning is promoted by carrying out meaningful tasks. And number five, language should be viewed in terms of its functions. It is true that language is the means of communication and its primary function is to communicate. As the communicative approach rests on the functions of language, it's important to see what kinds of functions the language can perform. The various functions that the language could perform are, number one, the instructional function, by which we mean using language to get the things done by giving instructions. Number two, language has got regulatory function. That is, using language, we can control the behavior of others or regulate the behavior of others. Number three, interactional function, by which we mean using language, we interact with others. Number four, it has got personal function, by which we mean using language, we express the personal feelings and emotions and communicate the meaning that we exactly want to communicate to others. Number five, heuristic function. By heuristic function, we mean using language, we learn new things and discover the unknown things. Number six, imaginative function. By imaginative function, we mean using language, we can create the world of imagination as poets do. Number seven, representational function. By using language, we can communicate information and represent the things as they are. So these are the various functions that we use using language. And if language is to be picked up by the students, these functions are to be communicated, and the students should be enabled to do these functions using the language. Communicative approach also believes that language reflects certain characteristics such as its use and its nature. The common beliefs of communication language teaching are: number one, language is system for the expression of meaning, and its primary function is to allow interaction and communication. Number two, the structure of language reflects its functional and communicative uses. Number three, the primary units of language are not merely grammatical and structural features, but categories of functional and communicative meanings exemplified in discourse. The approach is generally believed to a broad plan of teaching. It's a kind of outlook about certain ideas. It does not precisely state the things to be done in detail, but communicative language teaching, being the most popular approach in the contemporary times, records certain beliefs as its principles, which are reflected in all communicative language teaching practices. The principles of communicative approach can be listed as: number one, learners learn a language through using it to communicate. Number two, authentic and meaningful communication should be the goal of classroom activities. Number three, fluency is an important dimension of communication. Number four, communication involves the integration of different linguistic skills. And number five, learning is a process of creative construction and involves trial and error. There are certain traits common to all communicative language teaching practices. They are unique in themselves, and all the communicative language teaching practices should reflect them. Some observed the characteristic features of communicative language learning, as you could see in the slide. Number one, it aims to attain communicative competence, that is, using language accurately and appropriately. The prime focus here is the learner. The teacher is just a facilitator, a person who manages the environment and material which will help the student become autonomous learner. It believes in tasks which are more meaningful. And number four, the function of the language is given importance than the structure of the language. Number five, it has the characteristic feature of making the learners fluent and accurate language users for the purpose of communication. So the communicative approach is a sort of shift of language teaching from the teacher-based to the learner-based, the form-based teaching to the function-based learning, the rigid methods to an eclectic approach. Eclectic approach would mean a combination of various activities and making the students perform the tasks in order to enable them to pick up the language. This approach enables a learner to communicate in the target language, and hence it is called as a communicative approach. It is rather an extension of the notional functional approach. The notional functional approach was developed for a specific purpose with a specific need in mind, whereas the communicative approach is just an approach to enable the communication successful. The notional functional approach has language units, a sort of reanalysis in terms of its own functions alone. But communicative approach is a wider term which includes who speaks, to whom, how, when, and why. If you are getting the answers to all these WH questions, automatically we are into the communicative approach. The notional functional approach has the language units where they are analyzed in terms of meaning chunks. In communicative approach, everything aims at developing the communicative competence among the learners. So communicative approach is a wider term. and an extension of the notional functional approach, incorporating all the activities, all the tasks, and enabling us to understand who speaks whom, how, why, and when, and thereby achieve the communicative competence among the learners. The communicative approach also includes and is an extension of the audiolingual method. Principles and practices of communicative approach in many ways are similar to that of audiolingual method. It may lead to confusion that communicative approach is no different than the audiolingual method. However, communicative approach should not be identified with audiolingual method. It is altogether a different theory than audiolingual method. There are some fundamental points of diversion between communicative approach and audiolingual method. The points of distinction are given by Finocchiaro and Brumfitt in the following way. The audiolingual method attends to structure and form more than meaning, whereas in communicative language teaching, which is from hereafter called as CLT, communicative language teaching, meaning is paramount. The audiolingual method demands memorization of structure-based dialogues, whereas in communicative language teaching, dialogues center around the communicative function and are not normally memorized. In audiolingual method, language items are not necessarily contextualized, whereas in communicative language teaching, contextualizing is the basic principle. The audiolingual method believes that language learning is learning structures, sounds, or words, whereas the communicative language teaching believes that language learning is learning to communicate. The audiolingual method seeks mastery in the language, whereas the communicative language teaching seeks effective communication. Communicative activities come at the end of the audiolingual method, whereas communicative language teaching has encouraged all these activities right from the beginning till the end. It is, in fact, doing the activities and learning the language by themselves. That is given emphasis in CLT. The mother tongue use and translation are completely forbidden in audiolingual method. But in communicative language teaching, judicious mother tongue use and limited translation is allowed. Over teaching is focused to learn and the target language system in audiolingual method. But in communicative language teaching, the target linguistic system is learned through struggle to communicate themselves. And the struggle is done by the learner and not the teacher. And only then the communicative competence has been achieved by them. The audiolingual method aims at achieving linguistic competence and accuracy, whereas the communicative language teaching aims at achieving communicative competence and fluency. The teacher controls the learning in audiolingual method, whereas in communicative language teaching, the teacher facilitates the learning and the learner learns to achieve communicative competence. This is the basic difference between audiolingual method and the communicative approach. The communicative approach has come out with a number of syllabi, which have the common features like, number one, systematically organize the syllabus for functions and notions. Situations and functions are given importance. They emphasize the appropriacy of language use and language required to perform different tasks like solving puzzles, getting information are given emphasis. C.J. Brumfitt in 1980 has given grammatical importance first, followed by the functions, and then notions, and then situations to achieve the communicative competence. Whereas Galden's syllabus of communicative approach that he presented in 1982 has given importance number one to structural, followed by the communicative framework. J.P.B. Allen in 1980 has presented a different syllabus of communicative approach that believed in giving importance to structural first, then functional, and then instrumental, leading to communicative competence. All these are different types of syllabi presented by different people in the 1980s and 19s to achieve communicative competence by the learners. The communicative approach believes in two types of syllabi. the process-oriented syllabus and the product-oriented syllabus. Let us talk about the process-oriented syllabus first. The notional functional syllabus can be used as the model syllabus for teaching English through communicative language teaching. What N.S. Prabhu writes in this regard is quite significant. N.S. Prabhu actually supports the procedural syllabus. Bangalore project with mind energizing activities like information gap activities, reasoning gap activities, opinion gap activities are to be given, and the students are supposed to solve these activities simultaneously learning the language, is what N.S. Prabhu talks about. He says that the only form of syllabus which is compatible with and can support communicational teaching seems to be the procedural one, which lists in more or less details the types of tasks to be attempted in the classroom and suggests an order of complexity for the tasks of the same kind. Communicative language teaching brings learners to the center of the teaching learning process and limits the teacher's role to that of the facilitator only. The learner in CLT classroom is a negotiator. He or she negotiates between the self and the learning process. It is the learner who decides what teaching and learning should be like. The role of learners in communicative language teaching is best defined by Breen and Cadlin. According to them, the role of a learner is to negotiate between the self and the learning process. The object of learning emerges from and interacts with the role of joint negotiator within the group and within the classroom procedures and activities that the group undertakes. The implication for the learner is that he should contribute as much as he gains and thereby learn in an independent way. The teacher has to facilitate the communication process between all participants in the classroom and between the participants and the various activities and texts, and also as an independent participant within a group. Language learning for communicative approach is a collaborative activity. Richards and Podgers Richards and Rogers make a significant comment in this regard. They say that CLT methodologies recommended that learners learn to see that failed communication is a joint responsibility and not the fault of the speaker or the listener. Similarly, successful communication is an accomplishment jointly achieved by and acknowledged. The next type of communicative approach is the product oriented syllabus, the context based syllabus. They are learned so that the writer or speaker can communicate something about a subject or topic to the listener or reader. Accordingly, we have ESP, English for specific purpose, that is evolved. The remedial learning based on error analysis is one of the most important features of CLT. The teacher is responsible for determining and responding to the learner's needs. Teacher also assumes the roles of a counselor in communicative language teaching. He or she is supposed to paraphrase, confirm, and provide feedback to the learners, besides exemplifying effective communication. She or he has also to act as the group process manager. It is the responsibility of the teacher to organize the classroom for the communicative activities. Thus, the teacher has to act as a need analyst, counselor, and group manager. The instructional materials that are used in process-oriented syllabus and product-oriented syllabus in CLT generally include text-based and text-based material. There are many texts that are designed to support communicative language teaching. Task-based materials include variety of role plays, simulations, exercise handbooks, cue cards, activity cards, pair communication, practice materials, and many more task-based communicative activities. Use of signs, magazines, advertisements, newspapers, maps, pictures, symbols, and audiovisual materials is advocated in CLT. And English for specific purpose, which is essentially a product oriented syllabus of the recent era, talks about designing a particular syllabus in English, especially for the purpose of performance by a minister or a businessman or a cricketer or a tourist and so on. So a special syllabus is designed for them and only that much is taught and practiced so that the minister who knew nothing about the English language after 6 months of ESP training definitely picks up the language and performs his function and uses the language to give a speech. Or a cricketer who never knew English, after a 3 month to 6 months training in ESP, definitely will be in a position to give an interview to a channel. Or a tourist can perform his function. So, in conclusion, we can say that communicative language teaching is not a method but an approach, as it includes variety of activities and techniques of language learning and teaching. It is a set of principles supporting communicative language learning. Though it believes in the primacy of speech, it also believes in integrating the basic skills of language in the natural order of language, that is, listening, speaking, reading, as well as writing. Communicative language teaching gives importance to the functional aspect of the language than its nature is built around the same. That is, language learning is learning to communicate. It is used as one of the useful innovations of language teaching even today. Most of the further advancements and research in the field of ELT seem to be influenced by communicative language teaching. Much emphasis is on communicative language teaching today because it believes in the learner-centric methodology of teaching and learning with activity and task-based learning, which achieves at the communicative competence of the learner. Thank you very much for being a part of this video on communicative language approach. Bye for now. Stay tuned for the next videos.